Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of the Lap Guide series, which is fairly obviously where I take a circuit from a particular game, on this occasion once again Gran Turismo Sport, and give you a corner by corner flying lap breakdown of how to improve, yes, your lap times, but more importantly your consistency and your racing confidence on that particular track, because to a certain degree anyone can improve their lap time just by practice, but it's more important to understand and to be one with the track to actually become a better driver on said track, because if you know the track, you will naturally become faster without trying, and that is far more important. Now, the way that we structure these videos is, first of all, I'll give you a couple of bits of trivia that's interesting to know about the track, some important stuff, some historical stuff, then we'll do the full lap breakdown, and of course then after the breakdown, which is done corner by corner, we'll run the full lap in real time so that you can see those things being implemented. And then finally, to cap it off, I'll give some of my tips and tricks as far as cars, tuning, and general etiquette that you need to be aware of for Laguna Seca. Now, as far as the track's history and stuff that you need to know, it is 2.2 miles long, which is actually pretty small. It's one of the most famous shorter circuits in the world, 3.6 kilometers in other words for our European friends. It was opened in 1957, and of course now it's called the WeatherTech Raceway since 2018. For the 17 years prior to that, it was Mazda Raceway Laguna Seca, which is what most of us probably still think of it as. It has 11 turns, most of which come up in a left-left, right-right kind of combination, and of course one of the most famous turns in the world, the corners 7, 8 and 8A combination that make up the corkscrew. And the corkscrew is of course the ultimate factor that tells you that there's a lot of an elevation change that happens on this track, 180 feet of elevation difference in fact, which is partially due to the fact that it was built on a dry lake bed. But that's it for the trivia. Now of course let's get into that full lap breakdown. First of all then, as you cross the start-finish line, you come up to corner 1, immediately after the start line. It's barely even a corner in the game, but in real life it's a much bigger deal, and that is corner 1 of course, which is that very slight kink left. It's very easy to take, but it's a crucial corner both in real life and in the game, because it sets you up for corner number 2. Your road placement on corner 1 will have a drastic knock-on effect, because when you come up into corner 2, which is that very steep left hairpin, which is actually known as the Andretti hairpin, you need to be in the right place on the road. Now you'll notice in the video using my N400 Maserati on sports tyres that I actually brake a little bit earlier than you might think, and that is crucial. Even in a race car, one of the most important things on Laguna Seca is to brake a little bit earlier, maybe only half a second earlier than you feel like you would usually need to. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is there's a lot of sand runoff on this track, so if you make a mistake, you will waste a lot of time off the track. The second thing is there are not a lot of natural visual markers to tell you when to slow down, so you need to learn the feel of where to brake rather than relying on visual cues. But once you enter that hairpin, I would recommend being restrained, especially midway through that second corner, which is the Andretti hairpin, because you should treat it, even though it is kind of two small left-handers, as of course one hairpin. So cut in early, cruise around the corner to some degree, and then ease onto the power as you exit, because it is very easy to run too wide. Now you come straight into corner 3 and then corner 4, which are the two right-handers. These are relatively simple. They are actually two of the most forgiving corners on the track. As far as this one, just implement the stuff that you all know. Slow in, fast out, go wide to go shallow. So get over to the left to swing into the right, cut across the apex of the corner. Don't give it too much power too early, and of course that is something that applies to every corner on every track in the world, but definitely here at Laguna Seca, because once again, you will end up in the sand, and as far as 3 and 4 goes, there's not really that much that I need to teach you. Be a little bit more careful with corner 3, and then corner 4 is more of a kind of coasting corner to some degree. You don't necessarily even have to brake for that corner depending on the car. Then that brings you to a very slight kink to the right in the road, bringing you up into corner 5. This is more towards the top of the track, at least where it's conventionally drawn out on a piece of paper, and then of course you have a very short straight leading into 6. Now we'll get to 6 in just a second, which is before the Rahal straight, but corner number 5 can be deceptive. You've got a little bit of like a dip in the track through that corner, so it can feel like you've got a bit of extra speed than you would usually have coming into a curve like that. So again, make sure that you brake a little bit earlier than you might feel, because 5 is one of the easiest corners on the track to run wide on the exit of the corner. So my biggest piece of advice when it comes to corner number 5 is actually for the first few laps in whatever car that you're in, at least the first lap, go a little bit too slow. Because going a little bit too slow will help you to feel the car's limits, and as you feel the car's limits more, you can begin to take the corners more quickly. But erring on the side of caution is definitely not a bad thing on Laguna Seca, because you'll often end up being faster than you might think by being more cautious. As far as corner number 6 goes, as I said, leading into the iconic Rahal straight, which goes uphill towards the corkscrew, 6 is once again a deceptive corner, but also it's one of my favourite corners on the track because you can save a lot of time. You can catch up with the AI every lap on this particular corner. It's actually surprisingly easy to overtake, because if somebody takes this corner wrong, they'll do one of two things. They'll either cut the corner way too much and go across the sand, and then they'll end up off the track anyway, or they'll do the opposite. They'll brake too late and of course end up in the sand. So if you can find the sweet spot and cut straight across that apex, you can easily pick up 1 or 2 positions if you are in the middle of the pack or even at the back of the grid. If you're not, if you're ahead of the pack, you can grab a little bit of an extra time distance between yourself and the others, and if you are in behind, then of course you can make up some time. Now, going up the Rahal straight is fairly simple. You know, it's just an uphill straight. There's nothing that fancy to it, but you do need to begin preparing and positioning your car for, of course, the corkscrew, because the corkscrew can make and break a great lap. So corner 7 is technically where you enter the corkscrew, that very slight right-hander. Corner 7, basically that exact entry point where you see those rumble strips, is generally speaking where you need to start braking, and that's in a good car. In a slower car, maybe a little bit later. In a race car, perhaps a little bit earlier. And of course, a big factor when it comes to the corkscrew and where you need to brake is the weight of the car, because a heavier car is going to be harder to slow down. So for instance, something like a large supercar, something like a Maserati that I'm driving here, and especially something very big like an all-wheel drive truck or an SUV, you will need to pile on the brakes a little bit earlier. Don't think that because you can't see the corner, you don't need to worry about it yet. That is the single most deceptive thing about the corkscrew. Now, entering corner 8, which is that left hand, which then suddenly dips down into 8A, which is of course the corkscrew itself, this compound left-right combo can again make up a huge amount of time on, for instance, a leader who's in front of you. It can definitely open the gap between you and the AI, or even real people who are driving behind you, but it is easily the point of the track where you need to be the most careful, because people can straight up pile into the back of you by trying to cut the corner. Even the AI will cut the corner on certain occasions, and I've had the AI just straight up slam into the side of my car when they've just gone completely across the sand. But we'll touch on that again when I get to my tips and tricks for the circuit. Now, 8A is actually fairly simple. That's the exit of the corkscrew, that kind of curving right-hander. But the biggest point here is to try and prepare the car for the rainy curve, which is corner number 9. Now, this is one of the most deceptive corners on the track, along with corner number 5, because it seems to be just a long sweeping left. Like the easiest thing in the world. And you can also kind of be deceived by the corkscrew. You might have a bit of confidence. Maybe you've taken the corkscrew, you're doing well, and then suddenly you realize you're off the track on the rainy curve because it's such a long, almost compound left corner that it can be deceptive. You can end up accelerating more and more through the corner and end up going way too wide on the exit and going over the rumble strips onto the sand and potentially even into the wall. Now, for me personally, the rainy curve is another one of my favourite corners on the track because it's one that people tend to underestimate and you can make up a lot of time. As a general rule, I would recommend beginning to slow down midway through the corner, because that will allow you to have a real slingshot exit out of the corner, and that of course almost immediately leads into corner 10. Now corner 10 is another deceptive one, not quite as much as the rainy curve, because again you've got the downhill aspect on that corner, whereas this one, it's more level, it's more of just a straight up right hand kink in the track. Once again, get all the way over to the left, slow down a little bit earlier, don't try and cut the corner too much, because the angle of corner number 10 means that if you do try and cut the apex, you can easily go off on the left of the track and end up potentially even unintentionally pitting. And speaking of the pits, that brings us of course to corner number 11, another corner where you need to be cautious of the AI because they will sometimes plow straight into the back of you. Corner 11 can be the undoing of a road car in particular, because in GT Sport the brakes generally aren't quite as good, and if you brake just a little bit too late, even half a second too late, you will go straight off the corner. It is an annoying corner sometimes in that way. Even in something like a prototype, you can easily overshoot the corner, and the problem is the trajectory that you're heading at, it's more than a 90-degree left. You're almost coming back on yourself toward the finish line, so if you do go off the track, you waste a load of time. So for this one, my advice is brake earlier than you think you need to, and until you get a proper feel of exactly where you can brake and where the car can brake, err on the side of caution. Do not try and take it as fast as possible, because more often than not, corner 11 can ruin an entirely great lap up until that point. And then of course, after corner 11, you go across the start-finish line and begin this merry little carousel all over again. So as I said, I will replay this lap in real time using the exact same footage again so that you can see it without all of the stop-start cornering and see what a full lap looks like in action. Now I'm driving this car as an example of what a street car can do. The Maserati is a deceptively good machine, but as I said, if you're driving a larger, heavier, maybe too grippy vehicle with a lot of understeer, such as a truck for instance, this can be a very treacherous track. Even in something like an LMP car, it can still be treacherous. Even an open-wheel Formula car can be caught out on this track, because Laguna Seca has the spirit of a track like the Nürburgring, but on a much, much smaller scale. It's a track which rewards respect. If you respect the track and take it in a calm, measured, consistent manner, you will win. If you don't, if you try and push the car beyond its limits, if you try and disrespect the track by cutting corners, forget it. You'll go straight off, you'll ruin your lap, and if nothing else, you'll end up going surprisingly slower than if you had just been more restrained and take it in a more smooth, calm, controlled way. Now, ultimately, as far as my tips and tricks go, as far as vehicles, I kind of touched on that already. I would actually say that Laguna Seca is a prime place for driving GT machines, such as the Group 3 cars. They really do feel great on a track like this, even as far back as the earlier days of Gran Turismo with stuff like Corvette C5Rs and Team Orica Vipers. They really do feel at home here, and even in real life, stuff like the Viper ACR has had a lot of success on this track in terms of lap. I would say that Laguna Seca favours cars that are a little bit more light on their feet and more nimble, rather than cars that are just powerful. Because, let's be honest, there aren't that many places on the track where sheer power is that useful, because all of the straights aren't that long, and the corners are so tight and so deceptive, and you have to brake so early, that having a massively powerful car doesn't really mean that much. As far as dealing with bad drivers and the treacherous corners, well of course I already mentioned you need to be in particular careful of the corkscrew and the final corner, corner number 11. In general though, just be cautious of people trying to use you as a braking block, slamming into the back of you, even not to push you off the track but just to slow themselves down. Sometimes people do it by accident. I've even done it by accident, not necessarily here but on other tracks, so be cautious of that. And you do always need to be prepared for an evasive maneuver. If you look behind and see someone coming up fast, don't be afraid to swerve out of the way, because swerving and losing the racing line does not waste anywhere near as much time as being taken off the track. And this is one of the most unique things about Laguna Seca compared to, for instance, the Nürburgring. The Nürburgring doesn't really have that much runoff. Even if you go off the track, you just hit the railings immediately and bounce straight back onto the track. Most of the time, at least. With Laguna Seca, on the other hand, there is sand everywhere, and you will end up in it if you do not pay attention to your surroundings. Even against the AI, as I said, they can catch you out as well. In terms of endurance racing, Well, it's actually a track which has been home to quite a bit of endurance racing in Gran Turismo and plenty of other games as well, so it's definitely a track that requires, I would say, more of a calm, focused approach. Don't try to be the fastest person on the grid lap after lap, because even though it's only a short circuit, it can be surprisingly taxing over time because of how much focus you need on certain specific corners of the track, such as 5, the corkscrew, and 11. So try to be, as I said, as consistent and as calm as possible. Being calm and keeping calm on Laguna Seca is possibly even the most important thing you can do. And in terms of tyre and fuel conservation, well, of course it's only 2.2 miles, so fuel shouldn't be too much of an issue. Even if you miss the right time, you can just pit in on the next one. As far as tyres go, I would say it's one of those tracks where there's no particular preference on front or rear tyres. You can easily burn through the rear tyres on a more powerful car, but you can also burn through the front tyres because of how grippy they need to be through the corners. So in general, I would say there's no specific advice that I would give for tyres on Laguna Seca. Just keep an eye on them, because of course a car that starts to get more and more understeer will definitely become an issue, because the corners require a lot of turn in, because they tend to be longer, more sweeping corners, such as on Spa for instance, and you need that same kind of handling advantage. Ultimately though, that's it for my circuit guide of Laguna Seca. If you do use some or all of the tips and tricks that I gave you here, I hope of course you have a lot of fun on the track. I hope you win races, I hope you improve your times, and most importantly, I hope you have fun here. This is one of my favourite circuits. It's one of the very few occasions where a short circuit is among my favourites, and it's certainly one of the most iconic tracks of the series. But overall, that's it for this vid. If you'd like to check out my other guides for Spa, the Nürburgring, Le Mans, and a number of others, then click the playlist on screen. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.